Well, it looks like 2018 could be the year of the customer experience and customer satisfaction. According to a Salesforce study, 75% of consumers expect a consistent experience whenever they engage, and 87% of consumers think brands need to provide a more seamless experience. And technology is helping with tools like automation, chatbots, machine learning, and AI, things that people used to do, to share how companies are using these technologies to create a better customer and client experience. Please welcome to the stage Andrea Stairs and Ning Tang with Fortune's senior writer, Phil Waba.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Bienvenue à tous. So today we're going to talk about e-commerce, and we're going to focus a little bit on Canada and China, but I wanted to start with a broad question, following on what Ellen was saying. Let's talk very high level. How are customers' expectations changing when it comes to online experience? Not just the shopping, but interaction with brands, maybe globally, and if you want to focus in a little bit on Canada, since you look at eBay Canada, and then we'll ask Ning to talk about China as well. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, so I mean, how aren't they changing, really? I mean, I think that on every parameter, customer expectations are being driven by new entrants and by aggressive players, and everybody else is sort of having to catch up on whatever it happens to be. I play in e-commerce, the e-commerce space, and so certainly we're seeing that there are leaders around the world who are very much changing the expectation on shipping times and cost and sort of selection, and then everybody else is having to kind of catch up across this, full set of changes, and so. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, we're in the midst of a sea change. I think the question is how, if you're a small business, are you, if we're talking about inclusivity, how do you keep pace? And probably more and more that's about platforms, that's about partners, so that you're not having to compete directly or to address directly every single one of those changing customer sort of elements.
And do you feel generally that companies are understanding and adapting well to this? Are they able to keep up with customers, or is it?
So I think it's a really mixed bag. I mean, I think you've got some companies that are obviously leading, other companies who are falling behind, and probably, it's probably a pretty normal distribution in terms of where people are. I think certainly when you look at small businesses that, for example, that are coming to an eBay or a similar platform, are trying to take advantage of the AI that we're using there and the kind of the new innovations, so that they don't in fact have to develop those themselves. But yeah, no, I think it's sort of a normal distribution, but I think consumers are starting to vote with their feet. And the challenge is always you get entrants who may not survive, but who in their brief existence change buyer expectations, and everybody else has to kind of sort of figure out how to fall behind in a model that or adapt to a model that was not actually sustainable in and of itself.
Right, and then the companies that are best at it are the ones that create the expectations, so you can never really fall behind. And my sense is that in China, the online shopping is so much more advanced than it is in the United States. So Ning, a couple of thoughts on customer expectations in China and how they're changing?
Yeah, actually, I'm from the fintech world. Fintech and the e-commerce are not all the same. Actually, when you do online shopping, you buy a commodity. You know this branded product, and you want it cheaper, you want it delivered faster. That's kind of easier. But when you go online looking for a financial product, it's much more complex, right? Like some people actually in fintech made mistakes several years ago in China by focusing on the kind of one click to buy. Yeah, it's very important, one click to buy, but buy
basic.
what?
Yeah.
Is it like a high quality product, or like a product that will default, right? So I think it's really about the finance acumen, right? Like, because financial services deliverables are intangible. So it's different from like e-commerce. But looking at fintech, right? Like I think it's about utilizing technology to make financial services more inclusive, like more value-adding, like small businesses, micro-entrepreneurs, consumers, and the rural people in China and other parts of the world now have better access to financial services. For example, like small business lending, in the past, it's just very hard to do. Now we have data, like say in China, we work with eBay, actually we are partners, right? eBay platform, on the platform, like a Chinese e-merchant sell to outside of China. And in the past, they cannot be supported by banking system because these are companies very light business model, no tangible assets, cannot have collateral for banking loan, right? But we get data from eBay, like all the operational data, transactional data, real time. We have like API connection. After we get the data, our analytics tool makes real-time decision and then helps like instant credit provisioning for small businesses. So very different experience.
So indirectly, it also enables more e-commerce and more participation in it and entrepreneurs, and it all comes,
exactly.
comes together. So Andrea, let me ask you a question. We were just discussing this, having a bit of a event fest, and also as the holiday season approaches and we all start shopping, generally, how do you feel North American online retailers are doing in terms of personalizing the experience and understanding what shoppers want, and just giving them that kind of clienteling that they have the right to expect now?
So I think obviously that's the holy grail, right? You want to create, eBay at any given point has 1.1 billion listings on it, and the challenge is how do you create a seamless path, a pleasant discovery experience for consumers, and every single consumer gets a path that is tailored to him or her. And that is the problem with scale. You can do it for a niche site where all of you're selling baseball cards, and everybody that comes to you loves baseball cards. Well, then it's really easy to deliver an experience that is perfected for baseball cards. For horizontals, it becomes much more difficult. And certainly, in a company like eBay, we've been using AI for a decade at least to personalize and to assist in search rankings and all sorts of back-end sort of key or core operational elements so that we can have a personal experience. But I don't know that we're at an industry level that we're really there yet. I think we're still relatively clunky on the personalization, and we have relatively. I think looking back, we'll say that we were using relatively simple algorithms that said if you bought bought X, then you were probably interested in Y, and sometimes they don't work really well. And you bought X, and we're going to offer you more X, and you're like, I only need one of these things. So I do think that. We're making progress, and you can see the progress materially year on year, but there's still a fair way to go, particularly for companies that are operating at scale in horizontal markets.
Yeah, and we'll dig in a bit later on Canada versus US since we're here. But
yeah, I'll have something slightly different to say about Canada.
I think in China, marketplaces seem to be a much bigger part of overall online commerce than in North America. I mean, do you see that continuing to be the case in China? Do you think marketplaces will continue to grow exponentially more quickly than the overall pie, or where's all this going in China?
Yeah, some thoughts to share. Actually, these days we see this like internet giants, right? Like a dominant market, and the traditional businesses have a very hard time to survive, right? In China, other parts of the world. But actually, it's all about like what can you deliver to the consumer, right? Like, what's the ultimate consumer experience? So if a traditional, like, brick and mortar business, like, thinks along that way, I think it's all about, like, multi-channel consumer experience. So naturally, it shouldn't think of itself as like a traditional way, right? The shape and form will have to change along with time and the changing consumer behavior. So at Credit Ease, we have this strategy philosophy. Every 5 years, we have to reinvent ourselves. We have to be based on consumers' future needs, right? Cannot be today's needs, future needs, and then we develop new capabilities. So I think it's like, you cannot limit yourself too much. Say, for example, like there was a listed company in China doing similar like model like Amazon many years ago, selling books online. It did perfect job selling books online, and it limited its bidding scope as selling book. Of course, like then it has made perfect a business, right? But then the business scope was too narrow, right? Somebody like Alibaba, like JD came, right? Crushed the company. Well, the company didn't die. The company moved to more kind of like a non-standard, more value-adding business model, because from selling book to more kind of cultural entertainment, mobilizing authors to write great stories, so on. Then it's a very defensible play, right? So I think in today's like very competitive like technology, disruptive forces coming in, we as entrepreneurs, CEOs, have to just rethink our like business model. We cannot be too far off, right? Like boundaries, we need to have boundaries, but at the same time, we shouldn't limit ourselves to very narrow business scope. Otherwise, you will be disrupted.
Well, right, and there's a question of finding out what makes your offering different, what makes your experience different. You sort of, in the US, Nordstrom says that it's never going to out Amazon. So what they try to do is really be the best at showcasing luxury and selling and integrating into the stores. And because we've seen companies that try to be like Amazon, and without that firepower, it fails, right?
But I think you also, like the marketplace model itself is one that is highly adaptable by the very fact that it's pulling sellers from and inventory from everywhere. And so it, both as in its adaptability and in the fact that it aggregates inventory and sellers and the offering of sellers that on their own would have a tremendous difficulty getting their inventory to the end buyer. There's a real role for those platforms and those marketplaces, and I lead Latin America as well, and you see that like Mercado Libre and like other sort of homegrown, but they're still marketplace models. Those models seem to be highly effective in not only in China and in Canada, the top two e-commerce players are both marketplace models. I mean Amazon with 1P as well, but it is a model that can rapidly evolve as long as the sort of core technology keeps up, and has this benefit of being able to tap into inventory and buyers in a way that is difficult for a single retailer to do.
I wanted to,
go ahead. Talking about marketplace, because like like e-commerce marketplace, right, can do some things very easy, like expanding to payment, right, which is a tool everybody can use. But when it comes to like insurance solution or like retirement planning, like these financial solutions, they have very deep domain expertise. Right? Not easy at all for those marketplace companies to get into, because it requires them to develop very new capabilities. So I think it's like a company has to find out its like key capability that cannot be easily replaced. Yeah. So if we develop a capability analyzing like loans. Yeah, creditworthiness for small businesses, or understanding how to do like retirement planning for middle class and high net worth individuals. This is very hard, like capabilities for marketplace companies to develop.
Yeah. So I just want to switch gears and go back to Canada. So I am one of Fortune's resident Canadians, exported to the US, and I often have had a lot of frustration dealing with Canadian e-commerce wanting to send gifts to family, not having to lie at the border and say, I have nothing that's worth more than 60, which is complete BS because I'm not cheap with my family. And so I'm just wondering, what's your sense of how far Canadian, it's better than it was when my niece and nephew were small, but it's still not great. And I'm just wondering if you can give us a sense of Canadian commerce and why it's not as big a percentage of total retail here as it is in the US.
Yeah, so It's catching up, but it's catching up as a result of global players coming in and developing the market, not local players developing the market. And I think I've been at eBay for 13 years, and before that was in retail as well. And I think that there was kind of this. Retailers would look to their right, look to their left. Their domestic competitors weren't getting into e-commerce, so they felt like they didn't need to either. And so everyone just sort of was stuck. And there is kind of a cliche about Canadian risk-taking and Canadian entrepreneurs in particular, and sort of, maybe not this new generation of entrepreneurs in the tech sector, but sort of more traditional entrepreneurs being willing to sort of settle and less willing to risk it all. And e-commerce at one point was an expensive proposition. It isn't anymore. But yeah, I don't think that we developed that ambition and early enough, and it wasn't a competitive imperative until foreign companies came in. The thing that we see though is we've got tens of thousands of small sellers. These are tiny Canadian retailers, resellers, who are extremely competitive and are come out of the gate with a global mindset, and they are looking at platforms like eBay and others to reach to around the world. And I think that's where e-commerce meets sort of trade and inclusive trade in particular. And certainly Canadian retail has benefited from protectionism, at the border, whether it's the in-person duty-free thresholds or whether it's the the de minimis, which is the threshold for shipments, which stays currently in Canada is stuck at $20 and has been since the early 80s. I mean, it's completely out of step with the US at 800 and other countries at sort of multiples of Canada. And that has benefited and protected Canadian retail, large retail, and has prevented Canadian retail from having to face the same competitive pressures that retailers in other markets have had to face.
I feel like I have to confess, it's not true. I frequently brought things that were way over the limit. And just try not to sweat as I cross the border into Canada. No, nothing above $60.
No, the in-person limit, I mean, if you're coming in, after whatever, 4 days, is $800. It's completely reasonable. It's the shipping one that is ridiculous.
Ridiculous,
yeah.
So let's go back to Ning for a second. One of the many things you do is you're an angel investor. Can you talk a little bit about the kinds of technologies that attract you right now as an investor?
Yeah, before founding Credit Ease 12 years ago in 2006, I was in VC, angel investing. That was like very early on. China had very few VC firms. Now we are a major investor in China technology. We provide funding to VCs, which in turn invest in startup companies. I think to put things in perspective, talking about China economy these days, one thing I'd like you to bear in mind, which is the easy money-making time is over. So it's going to be like the easy growth phase is over. Yeah, so now you have like a modest growth, and even that is difficult to get. And the whole market, really requires some depth. Yeah, requires some kind of domain expertise, and the technology can play a key role. In the past, investing in China, is more about 2C business models, search, social networking, these kind of gaming, 2C business models. From now on, you are going to see more and more 2B, types enterprise software, enterprise SaaS, so on. Because in the past, the money was very easy to be made, and companies, entrepreneurs, would love to focus on the top line growth. Right, growth, land grab, so on, right? No one was really focusing on cutting costs, being super efficient, so on. But these days, tough life, right? You have to focus on your expense side, right? Cost of capital, all that. So I think it's really, the growth is becoming more and more high quality and more difficult. So our job is to provide China entrepreneurs, VCs, with long-term patient capital that can be 10-year long, 15-year long, because Chinese investors are not used to that. Yeah. They are rather short-term, speculative, asking for government-backed return, government-guaranteed return, so on. So this long-term investing thing we are bringing to China, which is going to be tremendously beneficial.
Right. So now it's time for companies to really be solid and well-run and not just the wild, wild west. So we're going to take a couple of questions from the crowd, but while you are all putting on your thinking caps, one of the things I find interesting in North America is that you're starting to see a lot of prominent brands also go on marketplaces. And I mean, do you see that continuing? Also, do you see that as a way for them to get more market share in China down the road? It's just been interesting to see some companies hesitate for a long time to go to marketplaces, and all of a sudden they're doing it. Bold-faced names, not small companies.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for a while we had, I think the North American marketplaces have done a great job to address issues around trust and safety. And I think a lot of brands for a while were thinking about sort of reputational risk associated with going on. And at this point, the big names of marketplaces have by and large addressed those issues, and I think they've created a much brighter kind of open space on the internet that is more like your mall, and so more familiar to those big brands. And those big marketplaces, eBay included, are driving a tremendous amount of traffic. And if you want to be in consumers' minds, and they are the starting point for many consumer journeys, it makes sense to be there.
Right. So we have a question over there.
Hi, Lee Gallagher with Fortune. I was wondering if you could comment on the whole direct-to-consumer trend. We've seen so many brands emerge that just do everything themselves and sell direct-to-consumer. And is that a flash in the pan, or is that with us to stay? And how have conventional retailers online and brick and mortar responded?
Yeah, I mean, you've got, particularly in the beauty category, you've got amazing direct-to-consumer success stories there. I'm not sure if they hit a wall in terms of scale. And they've got this amazing growth curve at the beginning, and I think it's to be seen whether they are sustainable there. In Canada, we've seen a lot of direct-to-consumer that have started online and social, and then are starting to move offline to try and get that scale and to start moving into bricks and mortar. And then, so I think it's about the ambition of that entrepreneur and what's possible. But certainly, you're also seeing established brands, marketplaces, et cetera, come into social and try and have that direct conversation, particularly with Gen Z and millennials, with varying degrees of success, I think. So yeah, I think we're all looking around at looking at what everyone's doing and trying to figure out how do I emulate that in a way that is authentic to to what my business is doing. But yeah, I don't think it's a flash in the pan. I think with social media and more of us are looking to have that personal relationship with a brand, and if that brand is born in social media, you have that immediacy there. So yeah, I think the other brands are looking for personalization there and in other areas.
And it's been interesting to see. You can't really cut out the Targets, Walmarts of the world, I mean.
For so long. I mean, right. At some point, yeah.
And in fact, Harry's is in every Target now, so it just shows that it's never one or the other. It's got to be some.
Well, and you see Estee Lauder kind of taking investment positions, yeah, and so, yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, so. So as we're down to our last couple of minutes here, but here's a bit of a pie-in-the-sky question. Are we ever going to see a borderless e-commerce world? I mean, I would really love to be able to order a cool couch I see in Copenhagen and just have it shipped to New York as easily as if I were, well, it's not that easy from Soho, but you know what I mean. I mean, are we going to get to that point one day where maybe we're going to have a borderless e-commerce world?
So I think that's a while off. I mean, I think Jack Ma has talked about a borderless world for small business trading internationally. But if you look at what Canada has just agreed to in the USMCA, is that we are going to increase our tax-free threshold on on imports from $20 to $40. So that
Game changer.
Game changer, because that makes the difference on an e-commerce transaction, $20 to $40. So I think that we're far off, but I do think that for example, eBay has been advocating around the world to reduce barriers, particularly for small businesses trying to trade, because as we think about inclusive trade and how do we get small businesses trading with one another, those consumer barriers are the ones that the small businesses come into contact with, and that's what slows them down.
So Ning, in our last half minute, a quick thought on all that? Are we going to be one big happy e-commerce family one day?
Well, I think you're going to at least see a free flow of ideas, thought, and to a certain extent, capital. We invest in fintech globally. So far, so good. Very good. We've become one of the most active fintech investors in the US. So.
Okay, so we're getting there. So join me in thanking Andrea and Ning for chatting with us this afternoon. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.